Parents, it's time to celebrate. The new On Purpose Parents podcast, a Saddleback Parents podcast, has arrived, and we're here to help you win at parenting. As parents ourselves, we know that parenting is the toughest, most important job on the planet. You can't possibly do it alone. And now you don't have to, because we're your people. Connect with us by texting the word parents to the number 83000, visiting us at onpurposeparents.com, and tuning in every Wednesday with Kurt, Grace, and Chris for tips, ideas, and encouragement to help you win at being an on-purpose parent.
Well, welcome back, everybody. As always, my name is Kurt. I'm here with the wonderful Grace Yoon.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, sorry. And I stepped all over her welcome. I didn't think she was going to want to say hi. I thought
I just barreled my way
that
in.
was good.
You were on a roll.
I should have paused.
You were on a roll.
Forgive me for that.
You've been going since you were surfing early this morning.
I was surfing early this morning.
And you came in and just
and I'm still
smelling salty.
I'm still a little bit chilled. It was so cold this morning. Maybe have you guys ever been like snowboarding or up in the snow when your fingers get so cold that what do we call it? The dexterity.
Yeah, you can't move them.
You can't move them.
They're just
you can't grip your
slow.
keys. You can't. For me this morning, I could barely get the zipper on my wetsuit.
That
I was
does not
shaking.
sound fun.
It's fun.
No,
That part's not fun. I mean, with the surfing, because when the good part about this time of year is oftentimes in the morning the air is colder than the water. So you're really cold and you actually get in the water and you feel warmer in the water. The problem is then you get out and you're wet and then the cold wind hits you it's brutal.
Nice.
Why I do it? I'm not even that good. I'm not even a very good surfer, but I do it. No, I'm not, Chris. But it keeps me feeling young. So,
well, you know what you need to get is one of these. People watching on YouTube can see, but I always have these around me. They're the little hot hands, and they keep you warm. And I just love being warm. So whatever you describe just sounds really not exciting. But yeah, I always keep these on me.
Well, we ride our bikes. So my buddy lives in San Clemente. He lives about a mile or two from where we surf. But I live, a 20-minute drive. So we all meet at his house and then we ride our e-bikes down. But again, this morning on your e-bike, he had not hand warmers. He had electric gloves.
Oh, wow.
Battery rechargeable heated gloves. Like your seat heaters in your car. If you have my wife's car has those. My truck does not have seat heaters. But he had glove heaters. He was very proud. Okay, enough of that. Let's jump in. We are in our fourth week of our Boost series. If you've been following along, you know that for the last 3 podcast episodes, we've talked about boosting various areas of your family. If you're newer to the podcast and you want to, you can kind of scroll back the last 3 episodes. We've talked about different things we can do to boost different aspects of our family, including, of course, raising our kids. And today, we're going to talk about one that I think might be not the most important necessarily, but it's for sure the one that I think the most parents will resonate with. It doesn't matter if you have a newborn. It doesn't matter if you've got teenagers. It really doesn't matter if you're a married couple. Maybe you're a single parent. In fact, I would pause and say, for our single parent friends, this one might resonate a little bit more, right? Because one of the challenges, obviously, of being a single parent is you often feel like you're doing it all alone. You don't have a built-in ally to when you're frustrated or when you're in over your head. Married couples have the benefit of kind of tapping out for a minute and saying, "Hey, can you take over? Can you take this one? She's driving me crazy. You know how to relate to her better than I do. Can you?" And if you're a single parent, we recognize, man, you don't have that. You don't have that privilege, that blessing. And so, single parents, this one may be a little bit more for you than for others. Although I think it's also, and we'll get to it a little bit, this is more of a mindset, I think, of our hearts than it is a result of our position in life. So I do think parents who are partnered together struggle with this just as much as a single parent, because it's a mindset as much as it is a result of our station in life. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we boost our patience when we're raising our kids. Now, when you're raising kids and you're married, sometimes kids bring out the worst in each other and you have to boost your patience with your spouse. We're not going to talk about that. I'm sure there's plenty of awesome marriage podcasts out there. They'll talk about that. We're going to talk about how do you boost your patience with your kids, as has become sort of the norm in this series. We've each got 3. And I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Is that you're looking at me like you want me to jump in? Okay.
Yeah, we actually, we were comparing our notes right before this. Like we mentioned before, we don't like sit and kind of come up with these things together. Kurt brings his thoughts, I bring our thoughts. And we were looking at our notes right before recording. And our first one is actually exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
So I think you're going to kick it off. And I'm going to add a little bit of thoughts.
And I'm going to be very short because your thoughts are going to be much better than my thoughts. She's sort of like the Lord. Her thoughts are higher. Her thoughts are higher than my thoughts. Her ways are higher than my ways.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to make sure Sam listens to this
Yeah,
podcast because, this is coming from Kurt and he's going to take notes on the very comment you just said.
So my first tip, if we want to boost our patience, is to know our triggers. Mm-hmm. And you actually, your wording was the exact same.
It was exactly the same.
Know your triggers. Yeah. Triggers is sort of a trendy word in the last 10 years or so. Really what that means is just what sets you off. Like what tips you into the impatient mode. And you need to know what those are primarily so that one of the things I think about impatience that's where it gets tough is we oftentimes don't see it coming, right? It's like everything's going well, and then all of a sudden we have this short fuse. And I think that's what impatience is. Patience is a long fuse. Mm-hmm. Impatience is a short fuse. And if you don't know what triggers that, like what lights your fuse, what lights the fuse, and what is it about that makes the fuse so short? If you don't know that, then you can't get better at it. And it's going to be different for every parent, but every parent has something. It might be they don't listen to me the first time. They don't have first time obedience, and that triggers me. When they don't do their chores when they know they should, that triggers me. When they roll their eyes, I'm fine, everything's great until they roll their eyes, and I know that my impatience trigger is when they roll their eyes, because to me that's a sign of disrespect. It's a sign of sarcasm. It's passive aggressive, and I have a trigger for that. So know your triggers, because then you can go, okay, what's behind that trigger? Is it a healthy trigger? Is it an unhealthy trigger? How do I combat that? So it starts with knowing your triggers.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and the thing that I would add to that, since we had the same thing, is once you identify your triggers, pick just one, and come up with a small mini plan. That's one advice I would give on this first topic that we have. I think a lot of times when it comes to being patient or impatient, we're really always just like wishing. Like, I wish I was more patient. I wish I didn't react that way. And we're always just wishing, and there isn't anything concrete. But if we really want to be intentional, we can, once you identify what your triggers are, and you just pick one, and I'll say why, just one, a little bit, then you can come up with a really creative idea. So one example for me is one of my triggers is when I feel pressure to make a decision when there's not enough time to think it through. This comes up a lot when I'm working from home. I'm having meetings through Zoom or Teams on the laptop, but my kids are also at home. So they'll come in and they'll ask me a question, and sometimes I'm really good at it. They'll ask me a question if it's like, can I have goldfish? I could be actually even like leading a meeting or something, but I could lean back and be like, yeah, go ahead, have that goldfish. I can answer real quickly in that meeting mode. But sometimes they'll come in and they'll ask like, can I go play with neighborhood friends? Like go out. And then suddenly I'm like thinking, and I'm in a meeting, I'm thinking, okay, wait, what time is it? Like, what's their next activity? Like, have they done their chores? And then suddenly I'm like losing track of what's happening in the meeting. And then it just spikes. Like you said, that short fuse, it like spikes your impatience. It like hits you. And then, I stay calm, but I'm like motioning at them, like, get out of the room, And then after the meeting's over, I'm like, guys, you can't interrupt me. I'm yelling, I'm impatient, and it's not how I want to be. So once I identified that, one of the things that my girls and I have talked about was I let them know, guys, actually, this is one of my triggers. When this happens, I tend to kind of, my fuse is short. So one thing we came up with is, why don't you write a note and slip it to me, because I can process better, I think, when I'm multitasking at work in a meeting when I see a note. And then the other thing we talked about was, let's talk about our afternoon schedule in the morning before you go to school. So I can we're both the three of us are on the same page.
Right.
And coming up with that plan was super helpful. And I do want to say
because the plan, sorry to interrupt you. But
no, absolutely.
The plan creates less spontaneous questions and opportunities that if they have no idea what the plan is after school, of course they're going to have 25 questions.
Right. Yeah.
But if you plan ahead, it eliminates some of the in the moment decision making that is a trigger for you.
Exactly.
Other parents, that's not a trigger at all. They love that. They love figuring out on the fly what we're going to do. But for you, that's an example of your trigger.
Right. So we're being intentional about it. And I did want to just emphasize, if you're starting this journey of discovering what your triggers are, just to start with one, because again, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents to be like, okay, I'm going to be patient now. And then you just think, I must be patient in every area of every aspect of my life. And you're going to fail at that. And then when you do, you'll feel bad.
Yeah.
And then you'll probably feel like, what's the point? I'm not going to try anymore. But if you just pick one and you be intentional about a potential solution, maybe it's something even as silly as, if I feel my spike of impatience, I'm going to do 20 push-ups before I can say a word. That's my little intervention, or whatever it is. You can be creative. You're much more likely to be successful.
Yep.
And then that success will encourage more success.
Yeah. Well, and patience is also one of the fruit of the Spirit, right? So I think that sometimes you read scripture and you go, okay, patient, the fruit of the Spirit, that's something that God has already promised and said is in us as believers who have the Holy Spirit, that these are the fruit of that, or these are some of the evidences of that relationship. So patience is one of those that I think we kind of have some authority to say, hey, Jesus, you promised that I could have some patience because I'm your kid and your Holy Spirit is in me, and your Holy Spirit brings the fruit of patience. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of that. Can you help me? Right? I mean,
please, I need some more.
It's sort of like, God, I'm going to do my part of the work, and I'm asking you to do your part, which is help this develop a little bit more in me than I'm currently seeing. My next tip is that if we want to boost our patience, I think we need to practice the power of the pause. I think one of the most powerful buttons on technology that's ever been created is the pause button. I remember when it was TiVo. I think TiVo was the first DVR. That was a brand. And it was so popular back in the day that you would, hey, are you going to TiVo that? Are you going to TiVo that? Are you going to record it, right? Digitally record it. But the thing that was crazy with TiVo was you could be watching something live, like a live football game, and you could hit pause, go get your snack, come back, and hit play, and you would pick up the live football game right where it was left off. And I remember, and this goes back, 20 years maybe, my mind was blown. How is it possible? How is it possible for me to pause a live football game? The players don't pause because I hit pause. My neighbor might not be hitting pause at the same time I'm hitting pause. How is this technology of pausing a live event was revolutionary and mind-blowing? Well, raising kids is a live event. It's happening in real time. And one of the things that we can do when we get triggered, when we feel impatient, in your case, example, when they're coming at me with a bunch of questions, is hit pause. Like, refuse to respond in the moment. Refuse to feel like you have to give them an answer right now. Refuse to say what's on your mind. Refuse to give the easy answer because I just want the kids out of my hair, or I don't want to frustrate them, so I'm going to just right away give in. If you can hit pause, and it's okay to tell them, you know what, guys, give me a second. Sometimes we think when children, maybe they're acting up or they're doing something that warrants and actually needs a quick response. Now, obviously, if your child's about to run out in front of a car, you can't hit pause before you react. But I think we can hit pause a lot more often than we do. So this goes back years, and I think this is actually a version of hitting pause, and sometimes it was healthy and sometimes it wasn't. It was oftentimes when moms would say, and this is just a stereotype, but it was very commonplace on TV shows and everything. You wait till your father gets home. Oh. When your dad gets home, we're going to deal with this, right? Now, sometimes that might have been avoidance, or I'm just going to pass this off to my spouse. But there was also, I think, sometimes a wisdom in right now. If I respond right now, I'm not going to respond the way I want to. So I'm going to hit pause. We're going to wait till your dad gets home, and he and I are going to talk, and then we're going to address this behavior or this situation. And I bet you 9 times out of 10, when you hit pause and just say, slow down, I don't have to respond right now. I don't have to give an answer right now. They might want the answer right now about if they can go out with their friends tomorrow night. But it's Thursday night now. So I'm going to hit pause and think about it and get back to you.
That's good.
So if you can hit pause, I think hitting pause prolongs your patience.
That's really good. Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom there. I actually think just holding on to that is going to, solve a lot of the impatient bursts, because if you just give yourself a little time, a lot of times your emotions can have a little chance to settle down. My next tip is to set age-appropriate expectations and then make sure to communicate them. I think a lot of times, especially with parents with maybe younger or elementary age kids, it's easy to get frustrated because we feel like they're not behaving how they should be behaving. But it is always good to check, what do we think it is that they should be acting like, and what's that standard? And I read something somewhere that was super helpful for me in framing this was, think about the difference between what is childishness and foolishness. And I think it was an article, and this article was saying, childishness is part of a normal, healthy, developmental part of being a kid and growing up. And it might be like running through, a muddy puddle. It might be climbing trees. It might be being a little bit rambunctious and, like screaming and laughing and running around the house at a volume that might be a trigger to if people are sensitive to sound or things like that. But again, many of those things might be very age appropriate developmental stages while they're exploring and, growing up and feeling like what that is. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you don't have boundaries as parents. You could say, you can kick around the soccer ball in the house because, we're set up for it, but you can't do it at our guest's house, So you are allowed as parents absolutely to set the boundaries, but to identify that is different from foolishness, which is, in what I was reading, more of like a deliberate disobedience. Like you've already told them, you've already communicated with them, this is not appropriate behavior, and they willingly continue to do it. So thinking about those differences can really help maybe pick and choose your battles and maybe how riled up you get about it. Because sometimes I do find when we just see our kids acting wild and you're tired, you're just like, why are you acting like this? Like, this isn't the way you should be. But maybe that's not exactly accurate.
Right.
It could be that you're tired and you need to tell them to, tone it down a little bit for mama's sake. But it does really just maybe help frame that they're not being bad.
Right.
They're just being children.
Right.
And you may need to set some boundaries, but you don't need to get so riled up or upset about it like you're doing something wrong.
Well, man, Grace, you're hitting on something that we could do a whole episode on is we put adult expectations on kids. In all kinds of categories. We expect kids to behave and respond and decision make and all the things the way we do as grown-ups.
Yeah.
Which is why we ask, what were you thinking? Because in our grown-up mind, they should not have, we would have never made that decision. We would have thought it through. We think, well, certainly you were thinking and you made a thought process and you came up with a decision to hit your little brother with the baseball bat or whatever the case may be. Wow, that's very violent. Has nothing to do with my upbringing and what my older brother did to me. Has nothing to do with that. But to allow kids to be kids.
Right. Sometimes
we'll expand our patience just if we remember she's 5.
Yeah.
He's 13.
Right.
and 13-year-olds are bonkers. I should have more patience because 13-year-olds are bonkers. That helps. I love that. My final thought on how do you boost your patience is simply to focus on the positives, not the negatives. Sometimes it's very easy to slip into a mindset when we come to our kids of they always, they never, and we're focusing on the negatives. And when we're focused on the negatives, our patience is going to be shorter. So examples could be they come home from school and it's report card week or whatever the case may be, and you get it in the mail or online, however you access your kids' grades, and they got a C. And for some of us, that boom, that's a trigger. Grades are a trigger. Well, hold on a second. What's the positive side of that? Maybe last time around they got a C minus, or maybe they got 5 A's and they got 1 C. So it doesn't mean you don't pay attention to the C if they should have done better and tried, and if the C is disappointing. But where can you in the middle of being a little bit disappointed about that grade, where are the positives within that? It's a step forward from where they were, or they didn't do too good in that grade, in that class, but boy, they're doing great other places. When their room is always messy, and that's a trigger. Okay, their room is always messy, but they're really responsible in so many other areas. And if you can remind yourself of that and catch your kids doing something good would be sort of my practical tip on how do you focus on the positives as well. Catch your kids doing something good. Remember all the awesome good things they're doing, all the things they excel at, all the times they get it right. And then when they get it wrong, your fuse probably won't be quite so short. But if you're always focusing on the stuff they get wrong, well, of course, your patience is going to be thin because their shortcomings are front of mind. And when their shortcomings are front of mind, the fuse is automatically going to be a little bit shorter.
Yeah, that's good. And it's a good reminder because it's so easy to get caught in that loop. And then once you start just seeing the bad, you start to see more of the bad.
Right.
And it's like a snowball. And so sometimes we just need that like little intervention and say, hey, stop what you're thinking.
Right.
Always negative, and try to catch the good. I love that. My last point, and I'm going to kind of just go off of my second one instead of what I had in the notes there, Kurt, but is to be, once you have age appropriate expectations and you're sort of thinking the difference between childishness and foolishness and getting into that framework of thinking, is to communicate your expectations clearly with your kids. I think a lot of times, at least for myself, when I get frustrated is when I feel like I have an expectation that I'd never communicated and they're not meeting them. But I've never given my kids a chance to meet them. I just get upset because they're not meeting my expectations.
And they don't even know what they are.
They don't even know what they are. And what's interesting is I think that when you really evaluate your behavior as parents, sometimes we can enable them not to meet our expectations. And I'll give an example to illustrate. Let's say the kids' room is messy and the kids are playing somewhere else and I want them to clean their room right now. So I'll say, hey, I'll start off really nice. Hey, Karis. Hey, Zoe. Hey, can you guys clean this mess that's in the middle of your room? And then they're, off. Yeah, okay. We'll be right there. Then I'm doing my own thing and I come back and like, oh, they haven't come. So I'm like, Karis, Zoe, hey, I asked you to clean the room. Can you come do that? Okay, Mom. Then I go off and do my thing. They're still not there. Then what happens? Then my blood pressure starts to rise a little bit. Karis, Zoe, hey, I told you guys, come over here, clean your room. They're like, all right. And then what happens? Maybe a couple more times. And then finally, you lose it. Karis, Zoe.
Right.
How come you guys never listen to me? I told you to do this and you're not here. And then, okay, you've just lost your patience. But when you look at that, in a way, we are upset. I'm upset because they're not meeting my expectation of listening the very first time. But the way that I'm parenting right there, I'm telling them through my actions, actually, there's no consequence until I'm yelling.
Right.
So until I get to that point, you really don't have to listen to me. Or right around that point, because it's, what I'm saying is when I'm asking nicely, you don't have to listen to me. But when I'm yelling, that's when you listen to me. And I'm building in that pattern. So to break that, if I tell my kids, if we have a conversation, not when we're mad, but like in a different space, and I just say, Karis and Zoe, my expectation is if I ask you to do something, maybe the first or maybe even the second time, you guys listen. If not, let's discuss what's a natural consequence or a agreed upon consequence. And it could be, you don't get to do iPad tonight. And then next time, let's say I asked the first time, Karis and Zoe, can you come clean your room? Nope. Second time, okay. Last time, can you clean your room? I don't have to be upset. If they don't listen, I'll just say, okay. No need to lose my cool. We just institute the shared understanding consequence that we talked about. And it might seem a little prescriptive, but I will tell you, it's very, very effective.
Yep.
And you can just say, oh, I wish you could play iPad tonight. I really, really wanted you to play iPad. It almost like takes the personal, kind of sensitivity out of it. It's just like, oh, well, hopefully next time you could be on your iPad, something like that. And it's just helpful that way.
And you can take that one step further, and your daughters are about the age you can start kind of trusting that there'll be a realistic consequence that they come up with, is asking them, hey, you guys, I'm willing to ask 2 times for you to clean your room. If I have to ask you a 3rd time, there needs to be some kind of, what do you think the right consequence would be? Oh, well, we think maybe we can't play on the iPad if we, okay. And then when you have to, you say, boy, I wish you could play on the iPad. But, as you guys decided that if I had to ask you 3 times, you wouldn't be able to play with the iPad. And so I'm really just enforcing sort of the consequences that you guys said was the right one. Is you kind of put the ownership back on them a little bit, which is responsibility and all that kind of stuff. Wow. Okay, man, that's a good one. Hey, what I want to do, producer Chris, is I want to let you talk for just a minute about these, well, I'm just calling cheat sheets. So if you're new to the podcast, our big umbrella purpose of the podcast, the reason we're doing the podcast is we have sort of a strategy in mind. There's lots of ways to raise kids, but we have one way that we sort of are always having in the background of our conversation. And that is that as parents, our goal is to raise interdependent, lifelong followers of Jesus who desire to make a kingdom contribution. That at the end of the day, that's what the goal of parenting is. And one of the ways you do that is to understand the ages and stages and your roles and goals as parents and some things to think about along the way. There's all kinds of books out there and ministries that talk about parenting through the different phases is a very popular one. There's all kinds of stuff on adolescent and childhood development and all that kind of stuff. So there's nothing new under the sun. What we're doing is not new. It's just our twist on it. But Chris, you put together some really cool, like one sheet on each parenting stage and the role and goal of parenting in that stage that I think for a lot of our parents, as you were talking about, Grace, of setting age appropriate expectations. Well, understanding the stages of your kids and what your roles and goals are as a parent might help set some of those age appropriate. It gives you a better understanding of that. So Chris, can you talk about where they can find those and maybe a little bit more about those one page, for lack of a better phrase, cheat sheets?
Yeah. So it's basically 7 articles that we have, 7 short articles that we'll put together as a resource. And if you go to onpurposeparents.com and scroll down to the button that says resources, you'll click on that. We'll also put a link in these show notes that we'll have here too. So you click on that and you'll be able to download a PDF of these articles. But it's basically what is an on-purpose parent and then how to be an on-purpose parent.
Gotcha. And then there's one, you're saying the word article, but they're really just a page long. Yeah. There's one page on each stage of your child and your role and goal. So the caregiver, crafter, all the stuff that we've talked about in the past.
And tips on how to achieve those goals.
Yeah, it's really good stuff and super simple. So thanks for putting that together, Chris. Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks a ton. We hope this podcast, as always, is beneficial. Share it with a friend, and we will see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining the On Purpose Parents podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us by rating and reviewing our podcast on iTunes. If you're listening on our Saddleback Parents YouTube channel, please like and leave a comment. Also, remember to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends. You can connect with us by texting the word parents to the number 83000, following us on Instagram at Saddleback Parents, and emailing your comments to parents@saddleback.com. As a huge thank you, you can browse our hundreds of free resources at onpurposeparents.com, all created to help you win at parenting. We'll catch you next time.